She grabbed a stranger's shirt in front of 500 people and ripped it open. Not in private, not in anger, she tried to hide, in front of cameras. In front of Chicago's most powerful crowd, in a ballroom that cost $10,000 a plate. The man said nothing. He just stood there, chest exposed, jaw tight, while the entire room went silent. And Victoria Sterling smiled, because she had never once been wrong about who mattered and who didn't. But she was about to be. Drop a comment below. What city are you watching from tonight? Let me know how far this story has traveled. And if you're new here, hit subscribe. You won't want to miss where this goes. The night Ethan Whitmore put on that uniform, he wasn't thinking about pride. He was thinking about Lily. She had drawn him a picture that morning, a crayon heart, with the words, "Daddy saves kids," written in the messy, beautiful handwriting of a 7-year-old who still believed her father could move mountains. She'd taped it to the refrigerator with 3 pieces of Scotch tape, overlapping, the way kids do when they want something to stay. He'd stood in the kitchen staring at it for a long moment, coffee going cold in his hand, and thought, yeah, that's why. That was the only reason he was here. Not for recognition. Not for the charity tax write-off, not for the networking, not for the kind of visibility that made other men in his position hire PR firms and show up to galas with photographers trailing behind them. He was here because the Aurora Crown Hotel was hosting the Children's Healthcare Alliance annual gala, and Ethan had been quietly funding that organization for 6 years without ever once letting them put his name on a plaque. He liked it that way. He'd asked them not to, actually told the foundation director, a warm woman named Patricia Lynn, that he preferred to stay off the donor wall. She'd pushed back the first 2 years, then she stopped asking. Some people understood silence as a gift, most people didn't. The Aurora Crown was the kind of hotel that made you feel like money had a smell. Which it did. It smelled like fresh flowers that cost more per arrangement than most Americans spent on groceries in a month. Like polished marble and cedar wood, and something faintly floral. They pumped through the ventilation system, so that the moment you walked through the front doors, your body chemistry shifted slightly, almost involuntarily, toward calm, toward deference, toward the quiet understanding that the people inside this building were different from the people outside it. Ethan had been inside rooms like this before, many times. He'd sat at those kinds of tables, worn those kinds of suits, spoken in the language of 7-figure deals and board votes and strategic acquisitions. That was a different life. Tonight he was carrying a tray. He'd asked the event coordinator, a harried young man named Marcus, if they needed extra staff. Told him he'd worked service before, which was technically true. He'd waited tables all through college, and that he wasn't looking for pay, just wanted to contribute however he could. Marcus had stared at him for a moment, clearly not entirely sure what to make of a middle-aged man in a clean but unremarkable jacket, asking to volunteer as waitstaff at a black tie event. "You're sure?" Marcus had said. "I'm sure. We have professional servers." "I know. I'll stay out of their way. I'll run glasses, keep things moving." "You won't even notice me." Marcus had handed him a uniform. And that was exactly what Ethan wanted, to be unnoticed. To be useful in a quiet, invisible way, the way the best kind of help usually was. By 9 o'clock, the ballroom was full. Not crowded the way a concert is crowded, or a bus at rush hour full, in the way that money fills a room, which is differently. There's space between people, there's room, but the air is thick with performance, with the particular social electricity that runs between powerful people who are always assessing each other. Ethan moved through that room like water around stone. He had a tray of champagne flutes, real crystal, the kind that rings when you tap it, and he navigated from the service corridor to the VIP section with the quiet efficiency of someone who had long since stopped caring about being seen. He kept his shoulders relaxed. He kept his face neutral. He was thinking about Lily again, actually, wondering if she'd convinced Mrs. Patterson next door to let her stay up past 9. When the woman in the ivory dress stepped directly into his path without looking. It wasn't dramatic. It was the kind of small, everyday collision that happens at parties, in hallways, in grocery store aisles, 2 people occupying the same space because neither of them had their eyes in the right direction. One glass slipped. The champagne caught the light as it fell, briefly golden, briefly beautiful, and then it hit the edge of the nearby table and sprayed sideways a fine mist of liquid. Cold and sharp-smelling directly onto the left sleeve and lapel of Victoria Sterling's ivory designer jacket. The woman in the ivory dress, Ethan knew who she was. He'd known the moment he'd seen her across the ballroom, not because he'd followed her career recently, not because he ran in those circles anymore, but because Victoria Sterling was the kind of person who made sure she was known. Her face had been on the cover of Forbes twice in 3 years. She'd been profiled in the Wall Street Journal, the Chicago Tribune, guest featured on 4 different business podcasts he'd accidentally heard while driving Lily to soccer practice. Sterling International, real estate, private equity, hospitality, a portfolio that stretched from Chicago to New York to Dubai. Built in 15 years from a single inherited real estate firm she'd restructured, downsized, and relaunched with ruthless precision. 42 years old, divorced. No children by choice, or so the profiles always mentioned, usually framed as a declaration of priorities. She was powerful, she was accomplished, and in the 3 seconds following the champagne spill, Ethan watched something shift in her face, watched the polite social composure she wore. The way other people wore jewelry snapped clean off, and what appeared underneath it was something much colder. "Are you serious?" Victoria said. Her voice was low, but it carried. "These things always carried." "I'm so sorry," Ethan said immediately. He reached for a cloth napkin from the tray, offered it toward her. "That was my fault. I should have been watching." She stepped back from the napkin like he was offering her something unclean. "Your fault," she said it, the way someone repeats a phrase when they're deciding how offended to be by it. "You think an apology is going to look at this?" She held out her sleeve. "This is a $4,500 jacket, I understand." "I'm sorry. I can speak to the event coordinator about cleaning." "Cleaning," Victoria laughed. Not warmly. "You want to send my jacket to a cleaner." "Or replacement costs. Whatever makes this right." "Whatever makes this right." She looked at him then, really looked at him. The way that people who've spent their whole lives categorizing other people look when they've finished the calculation, and don't much like the answer. Her eyes went from his face to his uniform, down and back up, and Ethan felt the assessment land on him like something physical. "Who let you near the VIP section?" she said. "Do you even belong in this area?" Ethan kept his voice even. "I was assigned to serve this section, yes." Assigned. Victoria glanced around. A few people had turned toward them. She seemed to register the audience, and something in her expression sharpened. "Do you know who I am?" "Yes, Miss Sterling, I do." "Then you know that whoever assigned you to walk champagne glasses into a VIP section at a $2,000 plate event made a significant error in judgment. Because this," she gestured at the champagne stain, "is what happens when you put the wrong people in the wrong places." Ethan said nothing. He was very good at saying nothing. "I want your name," Victoria continued. "I'm going to speak to Marcus, is that his name? The little coordinator? And I want to know who hired someone who clearly has never." "Excuse me." This came from a woman to Victoria's left, one of her associates, a sharp-faced woman in a red dress who put a hand briefly on Victoria's arm. "Vicky, it's just a jacket." Victoria didn't even look at her. "Diane, don't." Diane went quiet. The room, Ethan noticed, had gotten very still around them. Not entirely, the band was still playing something quiet and jazz-adjacent near the back of the hall, and across the room there was still the low hum of conversation. But in this particular 15-foot radius, people had stopped talking. Turned toward them. Were watching with the careful, cautious attention of people who didn't want to be noticed watching. Ethan set his tray carefully on the nearest surface. He said, very calmly, "Miss Sterling, I've apologized. I've offered to cover the cost of cleaning or replacement. I understand you're upset. I'd ask that we handle this privately, if possible." Something flickered in Victoria's face. It might have been the calmness. Ethan had found, over the years, that his calmness did something to certain people, people who were used to having their anger met with fear or capitulation. When it was met instead with steadiness, something in them spiked. Something old and reflexive. It was like offering a hand to someone who expected a fist and watching them flinch away anyway. "Privately." Victoria said the word slowly. "You want this handled privately." "Tell me something. What's your name?" "Ethan." "Ethan what?" A pause. "Ethan Whitmore." Victoria blinked. The name didn't mean anything to her, or if it did, it didn't surface. She'd clearly never connected it to the man standing in front of her. Why would she? The Ethan Whitmore she might have read about years ago had been a different version. A younger man in a different context. And people who categorize by appearance don't often look for contradictions. Ethan Whitmore. She repeated it with a faint, unpleasant smile, the kind that was designed to make its target feel small. Well, Ethan, I don't care about what you offered. What I care about is that you're standing here in this room in my space, in what appears to be a uniform that doesn't even fit you properly. And you've damaged my property and you're looking at me like you have some kind of standing to negotiate. Ethan looked at her quietly. No standing, he said. Just a person talking to another person. Oh, that's adorable. Victoria glanced back at the watching crowd, spread her hands slightly and appealed to the room. A performance. Does someone want to explain to him that this is not how? Miss Sterling, Ethan's voice was still calm, not strained. Not apologetic, just steady. I've said I'm sorry. I've offered to make it right. There's not much more I can do from here. If there's something else you'd like, I'd suggest talking to Marcus. He bent to pick up his tray, and that small, quiet act of just turning away was apparently the thing that broke something in her. Don't you walk away from me? The voice cracked like a whip. Sharp enough that even the jazz band seemed to fade for a second. Ethan stopped, turned back. Victoria was standing very straight. Her chin was lifted. Her eyes had gone flat and hard in the way that powerful people's eyes go when they've decided that something is a matter of principle rather than practicality, when they've crossed from anger into something more deliberate. Do you have any idea? She said softly, dangerously. How many people in this room could end your career with a phone call? Do you have any idea where you are right now? A charity gala, Ethan said, for sick children. Someone in the crowd made a small sound, not quite a laugh, not quite a gasp. Something in between. Victoria's jaw tightened. You think that's funny? No, Ethan shook his head. I think it's worth remembering what tonight is actually for. She moved before he finished the sentence. Later, people would describe it differently depending on where they were standing. Some said she reached for his arm. Some said she went for the tray. Some said she was going to take his name badge. But what she grabbed in one sharp, reflexive motion that looked both deliberate and uncontrolled at once was the front of his uniform shirt. The fabric was standard event staff issue. Not cheap, but not meant to withstand that kind of sudden angular force. It tore. The sound was small, just a small ripping sound in a big ballroom. But it was the loudest thing anyone had heard all night. Ethan stood completely still. He had learned a long time ago that there was a specific kind of stillness that was not passivity, not surrender, a stillness that was in itself a kind of refusal, a refusal to give someone the reaction they were trying to extract from you. His wife had called it his stone face, and she'd said it in that particular way she had of saying things that were both a compliment and a gentle challenge. You go somewhere else when things get bad, she'd told him once. That's good and terrible in equal measure, Ethan. He thought about her in that moment. He often did in moments that required him to be more than he felt like being. The shirt was torn. He kept his arms at his sides. Around him, the room had gone the kind of quiet that has texture to it. He could hear the ice shifting in someone's drink. He could hear the very faint squeak of someone's chair as they turned to see what had happened. He could feel the weight of perhaps 200 pairs of eyes without looking at any of them. Victoria Sterling was standing 18 inches in front of him, still holding a piece of his shirt in her hand, and she was breathing hard through her nose in a way that suggested she had not entirely anticipated doing what she'd just done. As she started, "That's enough." Ethan's voice was quiet. Not loud, not shaking enough. He didn't say anything else. He looked at her for a long moment, not with anger, and not with pity, and not with the particular expression of someone performing dignity for an audience. He looked at her the way his daughters sometimes looked at him when he made a mistake she expected better from, with something that was almost sadder than anger because it was so much more honest. Then he set his tray down again, this time for good, and he stepped back. He wasn't going to make a scene, not because he was afraid of her, not because she had power and he had none, but because there was a room full of people who had spent a lot of money to be here for sick children, And he was not going to make himself the story of this evening. He was going to find Marcus. He was going to go to the back room. He was going to borrow another shirt or put his jacket on and finish the night the way he'd planned. And tomorrow he was going to go home to Lily and probably not even tell her what had happened. Because she was 7 and she didn't need to know that some people in the world were this. That was the plan. He turned toward the service corridor. The voice that stopped him was not Victoria's. It came from the direction of the main entrance. Ethan, one word. But the way it was said, the way it crossed that entire ballroom, across the jazz and the ice and the 200 watching people made everyone turn. Because the voice that said it belonged to a man who walked into the Aurora Crown Hotel looking like someone who had never once in his life been invisible anywhere. Alexander Whitmore was 55 years old and looked every one of those years in the way that certain men look their age, not because they've aged badly, but because they've lived. Silver at the temples. A face that had been photographed enough times that it had a quality of familiarity even to people who couldn't quite place it. He was wearing a charcoal suit that had clearly not come off a rack, and he had the particular way of moving unhurried, direct, taking up exactly the space he needed without apology, that came from decades of walking into rooms where he was the most important person present. He was the founder of Whitmore Technologies. He was on the short list of investors that every major firm in Chicago courted and most never got. He was, in the estimation of this particular crowd, one of the 3 or 4 most powerful men in the state of Illinois. And he was looking at Ethan, at the torn shirt, at the tray on the table, at the woman still standing fabric in her hand, with an expression that was not quite anger and not quite grief, but something that contained both of them. He crossed the room. He didn't rush. He didn't run. He walked the way men walk when they have decided that what they're going to do next is not going to be stopped by anything. Nobody stepped into his path. Nobody spoke. He reached Ethan and looked at him for a long moment, at the shirt, at his brother's face, at the careful neutrality that Ethan was holding like something fragile, and then, without a word, Alexander Whitmore reached up, took off his own jacket, and placed it over Ethan's shoulders. A single unhurried gesture. It was so quiet it was almost tender. And then Alexander turned around. He turned around and he looked at Victoria Sterling. Victoria had been in rooms with powerful men her whole career. She'd negotiated with senators. She'd sat across the table from hedge fund managers and sovereign wealth fund directors, and people who moved markets with their signature. She knew what power looked like. She'd spent 20 years learning to wear it herself. She had never seen it used quite like this, because Alexander didn't say anything. Not right away. He just looked at her, calm and level, in a silence that felt like it was drawing the air out of the room. Victoria's hand, the one still holding the torn fabric, dropped to her side. She cleared her throat. "Mr. Whitmore, my brother," Alexander said. 2 words, very quiet. Victoria stared at him. "I'm sorry?" "The man you just put your hands on." Alexander's voice was measured, precise, like something that had been cut to exactly the size it needed to be and nothing more. "That's my brother. His name is Ethan Whitmore, and he has been quietly funding this organization." He glanced toward the foundation banner across the room. "For 6 years. Without asking for credit, without putting his name on anything. Because that's who he is." The silence in the ballroom was now absolute. The jazz had stopped. Even the bartenders had gone still. Victoria looked at Ethan, really looked at him, for the first time, not as an assessment, not as a calculation, but with the expression of someone who is watching the ground rearrange itself under their feet. She stopped, started again. "You're Ethan Whitmore." "I told you my name," Ethan said quietly. "The Whitmore who founded the—" She couldn't finish the sentence. The pieces were assembling in real time, and they were assembling into something that made the champagne stain, the $4,500 jacket, the entire last 15 minutes, all of it look very, very small. "The medical software company, yes," Alexander said. He hadn't moved, hadn't shifted his weight. He was watching Victoria the way you watch something you intend to remember. Before he chose to step back and raise his daughter alone after his wife died. Before he started giving away money anonymously, because he decided that mattered more than being important. Ethan put a hand on Alexander's arm. Alexander looked at him. "I'm okay," Ethan said. And the way he said it gently, without performance, the same way he probably said it to Lily on hard mornings, landed in the room like something heavy and irreversible. Because it was clear to everyone watching that he meant it. He was okay, not despite what had just happened, not because he was secretly powerful and the truth had come out. He was okay because he had decided, somewhere a long time ago, that his okayness was not contingent on other people's opinions of him. And in a room full of people whose sense of self was almost entirely built on exactly that, on other people's recognition, other people's fear, other people's respect, that was perhaps the most shocking thing that had happened all evening. The foundation director, Patricia Lynn, appeared from the edge of the crowd. She was a small woman in her late 50s, silver-haired, with the particular unshakable calm of someone who had spent her career working in children's oncology wards, and had therefore decided that very little in adult social life was actually worth panicking over. She looked at Ethan, she looked at Victoria, she looked at the room. "I think," she said, in a voice that was gentle but absolute, "that we should take a short break." The spell broke. People began to move, to breathe, to look at each other with the slightly unsteady expressions of those who have just witnessed something and aren't entirely sure what they're allowed to think about it yet. The band started up again, tentatively. Someone called for fresh drinks. The world resumed its performance of normalcy, but something had changed in the room. You could feel it. Victoria Sterling stood where she was for a moment longer than everyone else. Still, the torn fabric from Ethan's shirt was still in her hand, and she seemed, suddenly, to notice it, look down at it, the way you look at something you're holding and can't quite account for. She set it on the table. She did not look up. Ethan watched her for a moment. Just a moment. Then he turned to his brother and said, "How did you know I was here?" Alexander smiled, small and tired and fond. "Lily called me," he said. "She found the gala invitation you'd stuffed in the kitchen drawer, and she wanted to surprise you. She said, and I quote, 'Uncle Alex, Daddy's going to save some kids tonight, and he doesn't want anybody to know.'" Ethan closed his eyes briefly. "That girl," he said. "That girl," Alexander agreed. And for a moment, just a moment, in the middle of that grand ballroom, with its crystal chandeliers, and its $2,000 plates, and its very important people, and its very complicated evening, two brothers stood next to each other in silence. One of them was wearing a borrowed jacket. The other was thinking about a crayon heart on a refrigerator. And neither of them needed anything else from the room. The night, however, was not over, and neither, it turned out, was Victoria Sterling. The break Patricia called lasted exactly 11 minutes. Ethan knew because he counted, not consciously, not the way you count when you're waiting for something good, more the way your body keeps time when it's running on adrenaline and stubbornness, and the specific, bone-deep exhaustion of having been publicly humiliated in front of 500 people and refused to let any of them see it hit you. He was in the service corridor behind the main ballroom. Small space, fluorescent light, the smell of warm food and dish soap. A stack of folded linen tablecloths against one wall, and Marcus the coordinator standing next to them, looking like a man who had aged 7 years in the last 20 minutes. "I am so sorry," Marcus said for the 4th time. "Mr. Whitmore, I had no idea. I knew you were. I should have. I didn't." Marcus Ethan looked at him steadily. "Stop, but she." "I know what she did. It's done. Are you okay?" Marcus blinked. "Am I?" He stopped, stared. "You're asking if I'm okay?" "You look like you might actually pass out." Marcus exhaled. A long, shaky breath. "I've been event coordinating for 9 years," he said. 9 years. I have never. Nothing like that has ever. He pressed his fingers to his forehead. "I'm going to be fired. You're not going to be fired." "She's going to call someone. She's going to. She has connections to the hotel board and the foundation's major sponsors. And—" "Marcus." Ethan's voice was calm but firm, the kind of calm that stops a spinning wheel. "Look at me." Marcus looked at him. "You didn't do anything wrong. And I'm not going to let anything happen to you. Do you understand?" Something in Marcus's face shifted, something young and frightened and grateful all at once. He nodded, said, "Okay, yeah." Ethan nodded back. Then he looked down at the jacket Alexander had put over his shoulders, expensive charcoal, smelling faintly of cedar and something expensive, and straightened it. He looked at the torn shirt underneath, and made the quiet, practical decision to keep the jacket on. Some things you just dealt with and moved forward. Alexander appeared in the corridor doorway. He had a glass of water in each hand and the expression of a man who had been running interference in the ballroom and was choosing not to report on it yet. "Here," he said, handing one to Ethan. Ethan drank. Said nothing for a moment. "Then how bad is it out there?" Alexander leaned against the doorframe. "Define bad." "Alex." Alexander turned the glass in his hand. "People are talking. Patricia is doing damage control. The event photographer is being spoken to about the images on his camera." He paused. "Someone posted something." Ethan went still. "Posted what?" "A video. Short." Alexander stopped. His jaw shifted. Just the moment, Ethan set his water glass down on the linen stack. He pressed his fingers flat against the cool, folded fabric and breathed through his nose. Not in anger, in the careful, measured way of someone who is choosing, in real time, between several different responses and is making sure he picks the right one. "Okay," he said. "Okay," Alexander repeated. "That's your response. What would you like me to say?" "I'd like you to say something that sounds less like a man who just got his shirt torn in public, and more like a man who is appropriately." "What, angry?" Ethan looked at his brother. "What does angry get me tonight, Alex? What does it change?" Alexander was quiet for a moment. Then quietly, "It'd make me feel better." And despite everything, despite the torn shirt and the fluorescent light and the social media video and the 11 minutes and Marcus still looking like he might faint, Ethan almost smiled. "I know," he said. He picked up his water again. "Tell me about the video," he said. "How many views?" Alexander checked his phone, made a face. "How many?" Ethan said. It's been 11 minutes, Ethan." "How many?" 43,000. The corridor was very quiet. "Right," Ethan said. He finished the water, set the glass down, rolled his shoulders once beneath the borrowed jacket, the way a man does when he's settling something inside himself that has nothing to do with posture. "I'm going back out," he said. Marcus made a small sound of alarm. Alexander straightened. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to." Ethan looked at his brother. "That's not why I'm doing it." He walked back toward the door. Ethan Alexander's voice stopped him, not like a command. Like something older than that. Like two brothers in a kitchen at 2 in the morning, which was how they'd solved most things when they were young. "She's still out there, I know. And the cameras are." "I know, Alex." A pause. "What are you going to do?" Ethan pushed through the door. "Finish the night," he said. And he walked back into the ballroom. The reaction was immediate and strange. Not dramatic. People didn't part like a sea, or burst into applause, or any of the things that happen in movies when the protagonist re-enters a room. It was subtler than that. A ripple. A shift in attention so collective it was almost involuntary, the way a room full of people all look up at once when something changes, not because they plan to, but because some animal part of the brain is still keeping track of where the tension is. Ethan felt every single one of those glances. He picked up a service tray from the station near the wall. He loaded it with water glasses. He began moving through the room. It was almost, and he would reflect on this later, in the quiet of his kitchen while Lily slept, it was almost funny. Because the thing Victoria had tried to make him feel was small, invisible, wrong, and here he was, choosing to be exactly what she'd mocked him for being, and it felt like the most powerful thing he'd done all evening. A man near the east tables, gray-haired, 60s, the kind of face that had weathered a lot, and forgiven most of it, caught Ethan's arm as he passed. "Son," the man said. Ethan stopped. The man held his gaze. He didn't say anything for a moment, just held it. Then he nodded once, with a kind of gravity that had nothing to do with the party around them. "You did good," the man said. Ethan looked at him. "I didn't do anything, sir. That's exactly what I mean." He released Ethan's arm and turned back to his table. Ethan kept walking. At the far end of the ballroom, near the table by the window, he could see Victoria Sterling. She had not left. He hadn't expected her to. People like Victoria didn't leave rooms. Leaving was an acknowledgement that the room had beaten you, and Victoria Sterling had built an entire career on never once acknowledging that. She was seated at her table, her champagne and untouched in front of her, her back straight and her face carefully arranged into the expression she wore, the way other people wore armor. But her hands, Ethan noticed, were folded in her lap. She was looking at the foundation's fundraising display on the far wall, the photographs of children, the statistics, the stories that the charity had gathered over years of work. She was looking at it with an expression that was difficult to name. Something caught, something that hadn't finished deciding what it was yet. Diane, her associate, was leaning toward her and speaking in a low voice. Victoria wasn't responding. Her eyes stayed on the wall. Ethan moved past. He did not look at her. He didn't need to. What he needed was to get through the next 2 hours. To do the thing he'd come to do. To be useful quietly, for the children those photographs represented, and then to go home and call Lily and hear her say something like, "Did you save the kids, Daddy?" In that particular voice that made everything else in the world recalibrate to its proper size. That was the plan. The plan lasted approximately 7 minutes. Patricia Lynn appeared at his elbow. "Ethan," she said softly. "I need to talk to you." He looked at her. "Patricia. Not about tonight. I mean about tonight, but not what you're thinking." She glanced around, made the small decision that the room was too crowded for what she wanted to say, and tilted her head toward the corridor. 2 minutes, please." He followed her. In the corridor, different section this time, a quieter one, near the foundation's administrative table, Patricia turned and looked at him with the kind of directness that came from decades of telling hard truths to people who needed to hear them. "The board wants to acknowledge you," she said. "Tonight?" From the podium, Ethan shook his head immediately. "Patricia, no. That's not no." She held up a hand. "I know it's not what you want. But Ethan, what happened tonight, what she did, there are cameras. There is video. There are 200 witnesses, and you have been giving to this foundation for 6 years and refusing recognition, which is beautiful, and it is you. But tonight," she paused, chose her words. "Tonight the story is already being written. And if we don't have any say in how it's written, someone else will write it instead." Ethan was quiet. "The foundation's donors respond to stories," Patricia continued. "You know that. You know how this works. What happened tonight in that ballroom was an embarrassment," Ethan said flatly. "Was human," Patricia corrected. "Was real. And real is the one thing we can never manufacture in this work, no matter how much money we spend on Gallus." Her eyes were steady on his. "There are children who are going to need surgery next year who don't have the funding yet. There are families who are going to walk into a hospital, terrified and alone, and I need to be able to look them in the face and tell them we have what we need. And tonight, what happened tonight, if we handle it right. It's not something to be handled, Patricia. I know that." Her voice was gentle. "I'm not asking you to perform it. I'm asking you to stand up and let people see who you are. You've been invisible for 6 years, Ethan, and I have respected that. I have respected every single quiet decision you've made. But tonight the room already saw you. The only question is what they see." Ethan looked at the wall. He thought about Lily. He thought about the crayon heart. He thought about the way she'd said, "Daddy saves kids with the absolute uncomplicated faith of a child who had not yet learned to be cynical about the world." He thought about the video, 43,000 views and climbing. He thought about Victoria's face looking at those photographs on the wall. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" he said. "Stand up," Patricia said. "Let me introduce you. Let me tell them who you are and what you've given. You don't have to say anything if you don't want to. You don't have to explain yourself. You just have to—" She searched for the word exist. "In front of them, as yourself." A long silence. "No speech?" Ethan said. "No speech unless you want one." Another silence. "Longer. I want to think about it," he said. Patricia nodded. "You have about 40 minutes before the recognition portion." She left him in the corridor. He stood there for a moment, just stood, the way he sometimes stood in the kitchen at home at 6 in the morning, before Lily woke up. In that particular pocket of quiet, where there was no one looking at him, and he didn't have to be anything for anyone. He took out his phone. He looked at it for a moment. Then he texted Lily's babysitter. "Is she still awake?" 3 seconds. Then just barely. "You want me to put her on?" He typed back, "Yeah, please." 20 seconds. The small sound of the phone being passed. The slightly fumbling quality of a 7-year-old picking up a device too big for her hands. "Daddy?" The voice was sleepy, small, already halfway to a dream. "Hey, baby," Ethan said. "I'm awake," Lily said, which was so obviously false that he almost laughed. "I can tell. He leaned his shoulder against the wall. Did you have dinner? Pasta. Mrs. Patterson put too much garlic. I'll talk to her. She said it's good for immunity. The word came out in two careful pieces, and I said, Daddy says a little garlic goes a long way. Smart girl. A pause. The warm, soft sound of a child rearranging herself in a bed. Daddy, Lily said, did you save some kids tonight? Ethan closed his eyes for just a moment. Working on it, he said. Good. Another pause. Then, with the sudden clarity that tired children sometimes produce, is it hard? He thought about the corridor, the torn shirt, the 43,000 views. The woman in the ivory jacket looking at photographs on a wall with something caught in her face. Sometimes, he said honestly, but you keep doing it. Yeah, because that's what the right thing is. He pressed his thumb against the bridge of his nose. Something behind his sternum was doing something he wasn't going to examine in a service corridor with a gala going on 30 feet away. Yeah, Lily, he said, that's what the right thing is. Okay, she sounded satisfied, the way children sound when they receive an answer that fits exactly into a space they'd made for it. I love you, Daddy. I love you too, baby. Go to sleep. I'm already asleep, I know. Good night. The call ended. Ethan stood in the corridor for another 30 seconds. Then he straightened the borrowed jacket, walked to the end of the corridor, pushed open the door, and went back to work. The ballroom had shifted in the way ballrooms shift when the evening has moved past its social peak and entered the territory of genuine purpose. The dinner plates had been cleared. The band had stepped down. The lighting had pulled slightly warmer, slightly more intimate. The foundation knew how to run these transitions. This was the part of the night when the charity work happened. When Patricia and her team stepped up and told the stories that made people open their checkbooks, not out of social obligation, but out of something more uncomfortable and more real. Ethan took up a position near the back of the room, against the wall, tray in hand. He watched Patricia take the podium. She was, he had always thought, one of the most naturally gifted speakers he'd ever encountered. Not in the trained, polished TED Talk way, in the real way. She spoke the way people spoke when they had something to say that mattered to them, and when you listened to her, you felt the truth of it. In your chest, before your brain had finished processing the words. She talked about the foundation's work, about the families, about the specific children names changed for privacy, whose surgeries had been possible because of the funding this gala raised every year. She talked about a 12-year-old boy named Marcus. She paused here, and somewhere in the room the coordinator made a small sound, who had needed a procedure that cost more than his family made in 3 years, and who was currently in his first year of middle school, and apparently, according to his mother, mostly interest in video games and annoying his little sister. The room laughed. The room felt the laugh as relief. Then Patricia looked up from her notes. Before we move to tonight's fund recognition, she said, and something in her voice shifted just slightly, just enough that the room felt it. I want to take a moment that isn't in the program. Silence fell with remarkable speed. Tonight, something happened in this room that I think most of you witnessed. She didn't elaborate. She didn't name names. She didn't perform the drama of it. And in response to that thing, a man who has been giving to this foundation for 6 years quietly, without recognition, without ever asking us to put his name on anything, remained one of the most decent human beings I have ever personally encountered in a moment when he had every right not to be. The room was utterly still. I've respected his preference for anonymity for 6 years, Patricia continued. Tonight I'm going to ask his permission to break it. Just once, she looked toward the back of the room. Toward Ethan. He felt the weight of 200 pairs of eyes again. Different weight this time. He looked at Patricia. She waited. He thought about Lily. He thought about I'm already asleep. He thought about the photographs on the wall. He thought about the families. Patricia was going to walk toward next year and the year after with the truth of what this foundation could do for them. He nodded. One small quiet nod. Patricia smiled. It was not a triumphant smile. It was the smile of someone who had been waiting to say something true and had finally been given permission. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, I'd like to introduce you to Ethan Whitmore, co-founder of Whitmore Medical Systems, the platform currently used by over 300 hospitals across this country to manage patient care. The man who has donated, over the past 6 years, a total of $4.7 million to this foundation. She paused. Let that land anonymously, and tonight he volunteered to serve you dinner. The room went very still, very, very still. And then something started, not applause, not right away, because the room needed a second to catch up to itself, but a sound. A low, murmuring sound of recognition and recalibration. The sound of a crowd that is processing something that doesn't quite fit the categories they arrived with. Then someone stood up, the gray-haired man from the east table. The one who had caught Ethan's arm. He stood up without fanfare, without flourish, and he started to clap. And the room followed. Not all at once, never all at once. Never in those neat movie moments, but in a wave. Table by table, person by person, until the sound filled the space. Ethan stood at the back of the room with his tray. He didn't move. He didn't bow. He didn't perform gratitude or humility or any of the things you perform when you want people to see you performing them. He just stood there, a man in a borrowed jacket with a service tray in his hands, and he nodded once. That was all. It was more than enough. Across the room, at her table near the window, Victoria Sterling had risen to her feet with everyone else. Her hands were moving. She was clapping. But her face had an expression on it that didn't match the gesture, something private and complicated and raw. The expression of a person who is in the middle of understanding something about themselves that they would prefer not to be understanding. Her champagne was still untouched. She had not looked away from Ethan since Patricia began speaking. And now, as the room's applause continued, as Alexander appeared from somewhere near the east corridor and came to stand beside his brother, with his hand briefly on the back of his neck in the way brothers do when they're trying to say something, there. Voice can't reach. Victoria Sterling sat back down. She sat down and she looked at her hands, the hands that had grabbed a stranger's shirt. The hands that had been so certain 40 minutes ago of exactly how much a person in a service uniform was worth. She looked at them for a long time. Diane leaned toward her. Vicky, don't. Victoria's voice was barely audible. Please. Diane straightened, went quiet. The applause faded. The room settled. Patricia moved the program forward with the graceful, experienced efficiency of someone who knew that the most important moments were the ones you didn't drag out. Ethan set his tray down one final time. He walked to the table where Alexander was now seated. Someone had found him a chair, found them both chairs, with the particular social attentiveness that kicks in when a room has collectively decided it owes someone something, and he sat down. Alexander didn't say anything for a moment. Then 4.7 million, Ethan. Ethan picked up a glass of water. The number seemed right. You didn't tell me, you didn't ask. Alexander turned his glass in his hands. A familiar gesture. They'd had 1,000 conversations over glasses of something or other, across years and distances, and the particular grief of losing the woman who'd been the most important person in one of their lives. You know, Alexander said quietly, when Dad died and you stepped up the foundation work, I thought you were grieving. Channeling it. I didn't know I was grieving, Ethan said. But you were also. Both things can be true, Alex. A pause. Yeah, Alexander said. Yeah, they can. They sat for a moment in the kind of silence that only exists between people who have known each other long enough that silence is comfortable. That it means something. What happens now? Alexander asked. Ethan looked around the room, at the foundation display, at the people with their programs and their checkbooks and their complicated feelings, at the gray-haired man at the east table, who had stood up first, who was now in animated conversation with the person next to him, at Patricia moving efficiently between tables with her quiet, relentless grace, at Victoria Sterling, who had not moved, who was still at her table, who was staring at the foundation's photographs on the far wall, the same way she'd been staring at them before, but with something different in her face now. Something that was past the stage of caught and moving towards something harder to name. Now Ethan said the night continues. He meant it simply. He meant the auction happened, and it raised more than it had the year before. He meant Patricia gave 3 more people the opportunity to hear about the work and decide to contribute. He meant the band came back and played something warm, and the room let itself breathe again, let the evening settle into something that felt less like an event and more like a gathering of people who had, perhaps unexpectedly, been reminded of why they'd come. But he also meant something else by it, because what Ethan Whitmore knew, what he had learned in the years since his wife died, and he'd had to figure out how to be a father and a person, and a man all at once, without a blueprint, without a roadmap, often without sleep, was that the night continuing was itself the thing. Surviving the moment wasn't the victory, continuing past it was. And in that room on that night, the most important thing was not the revelation. Not the applause, not the $4.7 million, or the borrowed jacket, or the torn shirt, or the 43,000 views that were climbing by the minute on a video nobody had asked to be the subject of. The most important thing was this: in about an hour, Ethan Whitmore was going to drive home. He was going to park in the driveway of the house he'd bought when Lily was 2, the house with the slightly uneven front step he kept meaning to fix, the house that smelled like her shampoo and his coffee, and the particular, comfortable smell of a life being lived in. He was going to take off the borrowed jacket. He was going to look at the crayon heart on the refrigerator. And in the morning, when Lily woke up and came padding into the kitchen in her socks, she was going to ask him if he saved some kids last night. And he was going to say yes, and that was going to be enough. That was always going to be enough. Victoria Sterling stood up from her table. She crossed the room. She stopped in front of Ethan. He looked up at her. Alexander beside him went very still. The people nearby noticed and went quiet with the particular held-breath quality of witnesses. Victoria looked at Ethan. Her composure was intact, or most of it was, most of the surface of it, but underneath, something was moving. You could see it if you knew how to look. Ethan knew how to look. "I owe you an apology," she said. Her voice was controlled but not cold. Controlled in the way that things are controlled when they are working very hard not to break. A real one, not the kind people give when they've been caught. The kind they give when they understand what they actually did. Ethan waited. "I treated you." She stopped, restarted. "I looked at you and I decided who you were before you said a single word. I decided you were less than me. I decided that gave me the right to." Her jaw tightened briefly. "It didn't. It never would have, and I think I knew that somewhere, and I did it anyway. And I'm sorry." The room was very quiet. Ethan looked at this woman, this powerful, accomplished, complicated woman who had, 40 minutes ago, stood in this same room and made a decision that said everything about what she valued, and nothing good. He looked at her, and he thought about what he wanted to say. He turned it over carefully, the way he turned everything over. "Thank you," he said. Victoria blinked. She seemed to expect more. "That's all? What else would you like me to say?" She was quiet for a moment. Then, "I don't know. I thought you'd..." She stopped. Something in her face shifted. I was ready for anger. "I know," Ethan said. "I could see it. You're not angry." He considered this honestly. "I was," he said. "For a minute I was." He paused. "But anger at you doesn't give me anything I need. And it doesn't give you anything you need either." Victoria looked at him for a long moment. "What do I need?" she asked. And it wasn't sarcastic. It was genuinely asking, in the way that people ask when they've stopped performing long enough to actually want an answer. Ethan thought about it. "I don't know you well enough to say," he told her. "But I think you already know. I think tonight you've started to remember." Something passed across Victoria Sterling's face. Something quick and unguarded and real. The kind of expression that appears when a person is not prepared for the truth to land exactly where it does. She nodded once. She walked back to her table. She picked up her champagne glass. And for the first time all evening she drank. The gala ended at 11:47. Ethan knew the exact time because he checked his watch when Patricia shook his hand at the door, pressed both of hers around his, the way she always did when something mattered more than words could carry, and said, very quietly, "Thank you for staying." He'd smiled at her. "I said I'd finish the night." Most people wouldn't have. Most people didn't volunteer to carry champagne glasses in the first place. She'd laughed. Real laugh. The kind that comes up fast and surprised. The kind that's the best possible sound in a room that has held so much tension for so many hours. He walked to the parking garage alone. Alexander had offered to drive him, had in fact offered approximately 4 times in increasingly firm tones. But Ethan had his own car and he wanted the drive home. He needed it. That particular 22 minutes of silence between downtown Chicago and the house, with the uneven front step, where the radio stayed off and his hands were on the wheel, and nobody needed anything from him, and he could just exist inside the experience before he set it down. He got in, sat for a moment, looked at the steering wheel. His phone buzzed, not a text, a call, unknown number, Chicago area code. He didn't answer it. It buzzed again. He didn't answer that one either. He drove home. By the time he pulled into the driveway, he had 14 missed calls, 31 text messages, and a voicemail from his attorney that started with the words, "Don't talk to anyone until you call me back," which was either very alarming or very standard, depending on your relationship with attorneys. Ethan's relationship with attorneys was complicated. He sat in the parked car and read through the texts in order. His attorney, Alexander, twice, Patricia, 3 numbers he didn't recognize, 2 of which appeared to be journalists. One from a woman named Celeste who identified herself as a producer at a national morning news program and used the phrase, "your incredible story," 3 times in a single text message. Then at the bottom of the list, a text from a number he did recognize. His daughter's tablet, which meant Lily had woken up, gotten Mrs. Patterson's phone, or her tablet Mrs. Patterson's phone, knowing Lily, since she knew the passcode and had done the one thing she did when she sensed something had happened that involved her father. The text said, "Daddy, are you ok? I saw something on the internet." Ethan stared at it for 3 seconds. Then he typed back, "I'm in the driveway." Coming in now, he heard her before he got to the front door. Small feet on hardwood, the particular rapid-fire pattern of a child who has been pretending to be asleep and is now abandoning the pretense entirely. The door opened, and Lily was there, 7 years old, dark hair, her father's eyes, wearing the pajamas with the small yellow stars that she'd insisted on getting, even though she was, quote-unquote, too old for cartoon pajamas, Mrs. Patterson's phone clutched in both hands. Her face arranged in the specific expression she got when she was scared, but was working very hard to seem like she wasn't. "Daddy," she said. He crouched down to her level. "Hey, baby." She launched herself at him. Small arms around his neck, face buried in his shoulder, the particular fierce grip of a 7-year-old who is not going to let go until she's decided the situation is under control. He held her, over her shoulder, Mrs. Patterson, 61, silver bob, the unflappable practical warmth of a woman who had raised 4 children of her own, was standing in the hallway with an expression of combined relief and apologetic concern. She saw the video, Mrs. Patterson said. "It came across on one of those news feeds. I'm sorry. I was in the kitchen. I didn't catch it in time." "It's all right," Ethan said. "It's okay." He stood up, keeping Lily's hand in his. She'd pulled back from the hug but hadn't let go. She was looking up at him with that look. "Did that lady hurt you?" Lily asked. "No," Ethan said. "She tore your shirt. Shirts can be fixed." Lily considered this, with the serious, methodical expression she used when she was deciding whether an adult answer was sufficient or whether follow-up questions were required. "Were you scared?" she asked. "No." "Were you sad?" He thought about it. "A little," he said honestly. "But you didn't yell at her." "No." "Why not?" Ethan looked at his daughter. At the yellow stars on her pajamas, and the phone in her hand, and the dark eyes that had his wife's particular quality of complete undivided attention. "Because yelling would have made me feel better for about 30 seconds, he said. "And then it would have made everything worse for a lot longer." Lily thought about this. "That's really mature," she said. Mrs. Patterson made a sound in the kitchen that was definitively a laugh. Lily, oblivious, nodded with the gravity of a 7-year-old, who has just processed something and filed it correctly. "Okay," she said. "I still think she should apologize." "She did," Ethan said. That stopped Lily. "She did?" "Tonight, yes, and you forgave her?" "I accepted her apology." "Is that the same thing?" Ethan crouched down again. Looked at her straight on. "It's a step in that direction," he said. "Forgiveness takes a little longer." Lily studied him for another moment. Then, "Okay, do you want some milk?" Mrs. Patterson made hot chocolate, and I only had some of it. The weight of the entire evening lifted, just slightly, from somewhere behind Ethan's sternum. "Yeah," he said, "I'd love some." He did not sleep well. He hadn't expected to. He lay in the dark and listened to the house settle around him, the particular familiar sounds of his particular familiar life. and his mind in what minds do in the hours between midnight and 3 a.m., which is to say it went to all the places he'd been carefully keeping it away from since approximately 9:15 that evening. The video had, according to the last count he'd seen before, he turned his phone face down on the nightstand, crossed 400,000 views. 400,000 people had watched Victoria Sterling tear his shirt. And here was the thing that Ethan couldn't stop turning over. He didn't know how to feel about that. Not cleanly, because there was a part of him, the part that had stood in that ballroom, and held himself very still and refused to give her the reaction she was trying to extract, that felt something close to satisfaction at the idea that what she'd done was visible, that it was documented, that it was real in the world, not just in the memories of 200 people who might or might not carry it forward. But there was another part, the part that had watched Victoria sit at her table and look at those photographs with something raw in her face. The part that had listened to her say, "I thought you'd be angry," and understood what she meant by it. The part that had watched her drink her champagne like it was a conclusion rather than a celebration. That part was less certain about what 400,000 views meant. He fell asleep somewhere around 2:30. He woke up at 6:12 to his phone ringing. This time it was Alexander. "You need to see the news," Alexander said, before Ethan could even form a full greeting. Ethan sat up. "Good morning to you too, Ethan. What channel?" All of them. He found the remote. Turned on the television on the dresser's small screen, practical. Bought it because Lily had gone through a phase of wanting to watch cartoons from his bed on Saturday mornings and he'd given in about 11 months ago, which felt like a small but real defeat that he'd never quite been able to regret. He turned on the news. The clip was running. Of course it was running. The part where the shirt tore, the silence of the room, Alexander crossing the ballroom, the jacket. Then Patricia at the podium. Then the number 4.7 million, which the anchor said with a particular inflection that communicated something between disbelief and reverence. Victoria Sterling, the anchor continued, CEO of Sterling International, has not yet issued a public statement regarding the incident, which has now been viewed over 1.2 million times across platforms. Ethan turned the television off. He sat on the edge of the bed. "Ethan," Alexander said through the phone, "I heard it. 1.2 million. I heard it." A pause. "Her stock dropped 4 points. When the market opened," Alexander said. "Sterling International, 4 points in the first 40 minutes of trading." Ethan said nothing. "Her board of directors is convening in emergencies." Ethan's voice was quiet. "Stop," Alexander stopped. "What is it?" he said after a moment. "I don't want that," Ethan said. "Whatever is happening to her professionally, I don't want it because of me." The silence on the line had a particular quality. "She grabbed your shirt and tore it in front of a room full of people," Alexander said carefully. "I know what she did, and you don't want—" "I want her to learn something," Ethan said. "I don't want her destroyed. There's a difference." Another silence. Longer this time. "You're a better man than I am," Alexander said. He said it simply, as a fact, not a compliment. "You'd have done the same," Ethan said. "You just get there slower." Alexander made a sound that might have been agreement, or might have been the complicated noise of a younger brother who is not ready to fully concede the point. "Your attorney called me," Alexander said. "She wants to discuss your options." "Tell her I'll call her this afternoon." "Ethan, after I take Lily to school." A pause. "After you take Lily to school," Alexander repeated. "Her science project is due today. She made a model of the solar system out of painted styrofoam balls, and she worked very hard on it, and I promised I'd carry it to the car for her because she's worried about Jupiter." A silence. "She's worried about Jupiter," Alexander said. "The ball's too big for her backpack. She thinks she's going to drop it." "Of course she does." There was something in Alexander's voice now. "Something warm. Tell her Uncle Alex says the solar system is going to be great." "I will, and Ethan, yeah, whatever you decide to do. About Victoria, about the media, whatever you decide." A pause. "I've got you." Ethan sat in the morning quiet of his bedroom. "I know," he said. "I know you do." He took Lily to school. He carried Jupiter. She held the door. She did not drop anything. At 9:45, Ethan was back home, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, and his phone and the quiet. specific challenge of deciding what he actually wanted to do with the day that the world had handed him. The call from the morning news producer had been joined by calls from two other programs, a podcast, a national newspaper, and an organization called the Dignity in the Workplace Coalition that had apparently decided overnight that Ethan Whitmore was their ideal spokesperson and wanted to know if he'd be willing to participate in a panel discussion being held in Washington, D.C. in 3 weeks. He read all of it. He thought about it carefully. He thought about what Patricia had said. The story is already being written. If we don't have any say in how it's written, someone else will write it instead. He thought about what Lily had said at the door of the school. Jupiter safely settled on the seat of the car, backpack on her small shoulders, turning to look at him before she walked in. She'd looked at him with that particular expression, the one that was so much his wife's. It sometimes caught him off guard, even after 4 years, and she'd said, "Daddy, I told my teacher what happened." He'd been surprised. "You did?" She asked why I looked tired. "I told her you had a hard night, but you did the right thing." He'd looked at her, and she said, Lily had continued, that doing the right thing when it's hard is the most important kind of doing the right thing. "Your teacher sounds smart," Ethan had said. "She is," Lily had said firmly. "Her name is Mrs. Chen, and she has a master's degree." He was smiling about that still, even now, at the kitchen table, when his phone rang and the name on the screen stopped the smile clean. It was Victoria Sterling. He looked at the name for 2 full rings. Then he answered, "Miss Sterling, Mr. Whitmore." Her voice was different from the night before. The night before it had been controlled in the way of armor. This morning it was controlled in the way of someone who had been awake too, and had also spent time in the dark turning things over. "I hope I'm not. I got your number from the foundation. Patricia gave it to me. I should have asked first." "It's all right," Ethan said, a pause. "Have you seen the news?" she said. "Some of it. My stock dropped. My board is." She stopped. "I'm not telling you that so you feel sorry for me. I'm telling you because you should know the scope of it. What I started last night. You don't need to brief me." "I think I do. Because there are people." Her voice tightened briefly, then steadied. "There are people calling for me to resign from the company I built. And I understand why. I understand what I did, and I understand that it was caught on camera, and I understand that 4 million people have apparently seen it by now." 4 million, Ethan said. A brief pause. "You didn't know it was that many," she said. "I stopped checking last night. It's 4.1 million. As of an hour ago, she took a breath. "Mr. Whitmore." "Ethan. I'm calling because I need to say something that isn't for the cameras or the press release. I need to say it to you." He waited. "What I did to you last night was wrong," Victoria said. "Not because of who you turned out to be. Not because your brother is Alexander Whitmore, or because you've donated millions to charity, or because the video went viral. It was wrong when I thought you were nobody. It was wrong in that first second when I looked at your uniform and made my decision about your worth." She paused. "I've built my whole career on reading people, on assessing situations and making fast, accurate judgments. And last night I looked at you, and I couldn't have been more wrong. Not about the facts, about the thing that actually matters." Then listened. He didn't fill the silence. "I was going to put out a statement," Victoria continued. "My PR team has a draft. It's very good. It uses all the right language. It acknowledges the incident, expresses regret, mentions unconscious bias, references the work I've done." She stopped. "I'm not going to use it," Ethan said. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet," she said. "I genuinely don't know yet. And that's the first time I've said something in a business context and meant those exact words in about 15 years. A pause. "I'm going to figure it out, but I needed to call you first. Before anything else. Before the statements and the board meetings and whatever happens next." She took a breath. "Because you are owed that, just you, directly, before the world gets involved." The kitchen was quiet. Morning light through the window. The crayon heart on the refrigerator, still taped with 3 overlapping pieces of Scotch tape. "I appreciate that," Ethan said. "I don't expect forgiveness," Victoria said quickly. "Please don't think that's why. I know. She stopped. "You said something last night. You said you thought I'd started to remember." "I've been thinking about that. What did you mean?" Ethan turned his coffee mug in his hands. I think, he said slowly, that most people who end up where you are didn't start out thinking other people were worth less than them. I think they start out the same as everyone else. And somewhere along the way, in the middle of building something and protecting it and fighting for it, they start making small decisions. To look away, to not engage, to categorize. And the decisions get easier each time, until one day they're not decisions anymore. They're just reflex, silence on the line. And then something breaks the reflex, he said. And you have a choice about what you do with that. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. How do you know that? She said. Not defensively, genuinely, because I've made some of those same small decisions, Ethan said. Before my wife died, when I was building the company. I didn't tear anyone's shirt, but I looked past people. I made assumptions. I was in too much of a hurry to see clearly. He paused. Grief does something to your priorities. Lily did something to my priorities. You don't always need a tragedy to get there. But sometimes that's what it takes. Another long silence, Mr. Whitmore, Victoria said. And then she stopped, and there was a quality to the silence that was completely different from any of the silences they had shared the night before. Less armor, more actual person. I don't know how to do this. The whatever comes after this. I've had a PR crisis before. I've navigated bad press, board conflicts, hostile takeover attempts. But I don't know how to. She searched for the word. Recalibrate. At a fundamental level, I don't know the process. There isn't one, Ethan said. There's just the next right thing. Over and over, that sounds exhausting. It is, he said. It's also the only way. She took a breath. The board is meeting at 2 o'clock. They're going to want a plan. What kind of plan? One that demonstrates that I am capable of leading this company without, she paused. Without being a liability. Without being someone who tears strangers' shirts at charity galas. The sentence had a particular painful quality to it, the quality of saying something true about yourself, that you cannot yet fully integrate. What do you want to say to them? Ethan asked. A pause. The truth, Victoria said. I think. That's a good start. Another silence. This one shorter. Mr. Whitmore, Ethan. I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to know that whatever your answer is, I will accept it completely. All right, the foundation, she said. Patricia Lynn's foundation. I know it's unusual. I know after last night I know. But I want to make a contribution, a significant one. Not as reputation management, not for the press release, a beat. Because those children are real, and what happened last night reminded me of something I stopped feeling a long time ago, and I would like to do something with that before it fades. Ethan was quiet for a moment. He looked at the crayon heart. Daddy saves kids. Call Patricia, he said. Tell her exactly what you told me. She'll know what to do with it. You're not going to tell me not to? Why would I? Because it might look like Victoria. He said her name the way you say someone's name when you want them to hear it. The children don't care what it looks like. They care what it does. A long pause. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. She was quiet for a moment more. Then thank you. For picking up. You're welcome. The call ended. Ethan sat at the kitchen table. He thought about the board meeting at 2 o'clock. About Victoria walking into a room full of people who were going to be looking at her the way she'd looked at him, as a calculation, an assessment, a determination of worth. He thought about how that would feel. He thought that maybe that was the point. His phone buzzed. A text from Alexander. The morning programs are requesting comment. What do you want me to tell them? Ethan typed back. Tell them I have no comment at this time. Tell them to donate to the Children's Healthcare Alliance if they want to do something useful. 3 seconds. Alexander, you're unbelievable. Ethan, I know. How's your morning? Alexander, my morning is fine. My morning involved a full night of sleep and no torn garments. Ethan, lucky you. He put the phone down, picked up his coffee, looked out the window at the ordinary, specific, completely unremarkable Tuesday morning that the world had decided to hand him alongside everything else. And then, because the work did not stop when the drama started, he opened his laptop and pulled up the quarterly report he'd been putting off for 3 days and started reading. Because that was also the thing, the undramatic, invisible, unsexy thing that nobody made videos about and no morning news anchor covered in 4-minute segments with stirring background music. The thing that Ethan Whitmore had understood for years now, since long before the gala, and the torn shirt and the 4.1 million views. That the right thing was mostly just the next thing. The next email, the next decision. The next morning when you got up and chose who you were going to be in the specific circumstances the day handed you, whether those circumstances were a charity gala with 500 witnesses or a kitchen table at 9:47 in the morning. The world outside was loud about him. The kitchen was quiet. He chose the kitchen. He chose it every time. At 10:15 his phone rang again. This time the caller ID said Dr. Rachel Kim Hospital Board. He frowned at it. Rachel Kim was the chief of pediatric surgery at Northwestern Memorial. He knew her. They'd worked together on several foundation initiatives, traded emails, and the occasional lunch when their schedules aligned. She was sharp and driven, and had the particular energy of someone who ran on 3 hours of sleep and genuine purpose in roughly equal measure. He answered, "Rachel, good morning, Ethan." Her voice was taut. "I have about 90 seconds before I'm back in surgery, so I'm going to be fast." The video. You know about the video, hard to miss. The hospital board saw it. Half of them saw it before I did. And this morning, I had 3 different board members reach out to me separately to tell me that they want to create something in your name. A recognition program, an endowment, some kind of formal. "Rachel, I know. I told them. I said Ethan Whitmore does not do things in his name. I said that's not who he is. I said you'd turn it down. But here's the thing." She paused. "One of those board members is David Carver." Ethan went still. David Carver, chairman of the Northwestern Memorial Board. A man who had been quietly, consistently blocking the expansion of the pediatric surgery ward for 2 years on the grounds of budget allocation. A man whose approval was, in the estimation of Rachel Kim and her entire department, the single largest obstacle standing between their current capacity and what they actually needed. "He called me personally," Rachel said, "this morning, to tell me the video moved him." He used the word moved. David Carver, who has not been moved by anything in recorded hospital history, a beat. He also said, and I'm quoting directly here, that he wants to find a way to honor what you represent. His words. "What does that mean?" Ethan asked carefully. "It means," Rachel said, with the precision of someone who has been choosing her words for 90 seconds and has not been wasting them, that the man who has been blocking the ward expansion for 2 years is, as of this morning, looking for a reason to say yes to something significant. And your name, right now, today, is about the most powerful lever available to anyone who wants to give him that reason." The kitchen was very quiet. Ethan thought about the pediatric ward expansion. He knew its specifics the way he knew most things that mattered to him thoroughly, quietly, without having told many people. He knew what it would mean. How many more beds? How many more surgeries? How many families in how many waiting rooms? "What are you asking me?" he said. "I'm asking if you'd be willing to meet with David Carver," Rachel said. "Today, this afternoon if possible. Not as a press event. Not as a statement. Just as 2 people talking about what good can come out of last night." She paused. "You told Patricia you'd finish the night. I'm asking if you're willing to finish what the night started." Ethan set his coffee mug down. He looked at the window. He looked at the crayon heart. He thought about Lily asking, "Did you save some kids tonight?" He thought about what he'd said, working on it. What time, he said. Rachel exhaled, the sound of someone who had been holding their breath without knowing it. 2:30, she said. "His office. I'll be there." Ethan, yeah. Whatever happens next with the media, with Victoria Sterling, with all of it. A pause. "Last night, you were the best version of what a person can be. I wanted to say that to you directly, before the world makes it into something else." He was quiet for a moment. "Thank you, Rachel," he said. 2:30, she said. 2:30, he confirmed. The call ended. He sat with it for a moment. The pediatric ward. The board chairman, the lever. He hadn't asked for any of this. But here it was. And the question, the only question that had ever actually mattered to him, in all the years since he'd walked away from the spotlight and started trying to figure out who he was without it, was the same question it had always been. What are you going to do with what you've been given? He closed the quarterly report. He opened his calendar. He blocked 2:30. Then he picked up his phone one more time and texted Lily's school. "I'm picking her up today. Please let her teacher know." 3 seconds. The school secretary, of course, Mr. Whitmore. She'll be waiting out front. He put the phone in his pocket. He had about 3 hours. He was going to use them well. He drove to Northwestern Memorial at 2:15, not because he was the kind of man who arrived early to make a statement, but because he'd miscalculated traffic and then spent 4 minutes in the parking garage trying to find a space, which meant he arrived at David Carver's office at 2:28, slightly warm from walking fast and carrying the particular internal steadiness of a man who has decided what he's going to say and is simply waiting for the room to be ready for it. The assistant outside Carver's office, young woman, efficient. The practiced calm of someone who managed a very important person's schedule and had learned to read the temperature of every person who walked through that door, looked up when Ethan came in. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, "Dr. Kim said you'd be coming. Please go right in." He went right in. David Carver's office was the kind of room that told you everything about a man who believed in the weight of institutions. Not the man himself. Carver was standing when Ethan entered, which was something. A small, deliberate thing that said he had decided this was not a meeting where he stayed seated. He was 68, silver-haired in the full, complete way of men who went gray early and simply never apologized for it. He had the build of someone who'd played football in college and maintained just enough of it to remember. And he had, Ethan noticed immediately, the expression of a man who had been rehearsing something and was now slightly uncertain whether to use it. Rachel Kim was already there, standing near the window, arms crossed in the specific way she crossed them when she was trying to look relaxed and not quite managing it. She gave Ethan a look when he came in, a look that communicated approximately 6 things at once, most of them very chins of "I got you here. The rest is up to you." Mr. Whitmore. Carver extended his hand, firm grip. Held it a beat longer than a standard handshake. David Carver. "Thank you for coming. Thank you for the meeting," Ethan said. They sat, Carver behind his desk, not a power play, just the natural geography of his own office, and Ethan and Rachel in the 2 chairs across from him. For a moment the room did that thing rooms do when 3 people are trying to decide who's going to start. Carver started. "I'll be direct," he said. "I watched the video this morning. My wife showed it to me at breakfast, and I'll be honest with you, I didn't know what to say to her afterward. Which is unusual for me." He cleared his throat. "I've been on this board for 11 years. I've seen our development campaigns, our donor walls, our recognition galas. I have sat in a lot of rooms with a lot of people who gave significant money and wanted significant credit for it." He paused. "You are apparently not that person." "No," Ethan agreed. $4.7 million over 6 years, Carver said. "To the Children's Healthcare Alliance, anonymously. Patricia runs a good organization," Ethan said. "She does the real work. I just made sure she had the resources." Carver looked at him for a moment. Not assessing, he was past the assessment. Something more specific than that. Something that looked to Ethan like a man examining a thing he hadn't expected to find and trying to determine what it changed. "Rachel tells me you know about the ward expansion proposal," Carver said. "Yes, she tells me you've been following it. I've been aware of it." Carver glanced at Rachel, then back. "How closely aware?" Ethan said, "Closely enough to know the specific bottleneck. Bed capacity in the surgical recovery unit. 12 additional beds would allow the department to take on roughly 40% more cases annually. The estimated cost for construction and staffing over the first 2 years is approximately $8.3 million, which is within range of what the hospital could fund if the board authorized the capital allocation, which requires a 2/3 vote, which currently sits at 1 vote short of the threshold." Carver was very still. Rachel was not looking at either of them. "You did your homework," Carver said. "I do it for everything I care about," Ethan said. "And you care about this. I've been funding children's health care anonymously for 6 years, Mr. Carver. Yes, I care about this." The silence had a quality to it. A particular, held quality, like a room before a decision. Carver leaned forward slightly. "Why haven't you come to the board directly? With your resources, your connections, you could have made this case 2 years ago." "It wasn't my case to make," Ethan said. "It's the hospital's. The board's, Rachel's and her department's. I can provide resources. I shouldn't be making structural decisions for an institution I'm not accountable to." Carver looked at him steadily. "That's a very unusual position for a man in your position," he said. "I'm aware. Most donors want control in proportion to their contribution." "I'm not most donors." Another silence. Carver turned a pen in his hand, not nervously, just the physical thinking habit of a man who'd spent decades in rooms like this. Then he said, "What do you want from this meeting, Mr. Whitmore?" Ethan looked at him directly. "I want you to vote yes on the ward expansion." Just like that, and in return? "Nothing," Ethan said. "There's no transaction here. I'm not offering to fund it in exchange for the vote. I'm not asking for naming rights or board position or any other consideration. I'm asking you to vote yes, because 12 more beds means 40% more children who get the surgery they need." That's the only reason. Carver set the pen down. He looked at Ethan for a long moment. A real look, the kind that wasn't strategic, wasn't calculating, was just one person trying to see another person clearly. "You know," Carver said slowly, "I've been blocking that vote for 2 years. And before you assume it was purely budgetary, it wasn't. Entirely." He paused. There were concerns about the department's operational capacity. Whether Rachel's team could handle the volume increase without compromising quality. Whether we were expanding the right way for the right reasons. Rachel made a sound. Carver held up a hand. "Let me finish, Rachel." He looked at Ethan. "Those concerns were real. But I'll also tell you this. Because you've been direct with me, and I'll be direct with you, some part of me was also waiting. For the right moment, the right push, something that made the risk feel worth taking." He paused. "Last night, watching that video, watching a man stand in the middle of a room full of powerful people and refuse to be diminished by any of them, I thought about why I got into hospital administration. In the first place. Which I haven't thought about in a long time. The office was very quiet. I got in because of my son," Carver said. "He was 8. Leukemia. We almost lost him, and the hospital that saved him, the team that saved him, was underfunded, understaffed, running on 3 hours of sleep and genuine commitment to the work. They saved my son anyway." He looked at his pen. "And I told myself 30 years ago that I would spend my career making sure institutions like that had what they needed." He was quiet for a moment. "I got lost somewhere along the way in the institutional thinking. The budget cycles and the board votes and the risk assessments." He looked up. "Last night reminded me what the budget cycles are for." The room held that. Ethan didn't fill the silence. He'd learned years ago that some silences were not gaps to be filled but spaces that needed to exist for a conclusion to form on its own. Carver straightened. "I'm calling an emergency board meeting tomorrow morning," he said. "I'm bringing the ward expansion back to the floor. And I'm going to advocate for it." He looked at Ethan steadily. "I can't guarantee the other votes. That's honest. I can give you mine and the weight of a board chair's recommendation. The rest is up to the room." Rachel Kim made a sound that was almost but not quite a sound. "That's enough," Ethan said. "That's more than enough." "Thank you," Carver nodded. Then unexpectedly, "How's your daughter?" Ethan paused. 7, Carver said. Rachel mentioned. "Single father." He said it simply, without performance. "My wife and I raised 4. The first few years after a loss he stopped. Anyway, how is she?" "She's good," Ethan said. And something in his voice shifted slightly on the word good, a very small shift. The kind that only happened when the answer to a question was both simple and enormous at the same time. "She's really good." Carver nodded once. "Good," he said. And in that word, delivered by a 68-year-old man who had spent 2 years blocking a vote and had started a morning by watching a video over breakfast, there was more than agreement. There was something that understood, without needing to be named, exactly what was at stake in the simple, enormous question of how a child was doing. Ethan left the hospital at 3:20. He sat in the car for a moment before starting it. Then he texted Alexander, "Carver is calling an emergency board meeting tomorrow. Ward expansion is back on the table. 20 seconds. Alexander, how Ethan? Conversation, Alexander, Ethan. Ethan, that's it. Just a conversation, a longer pause. Alexander, you walked in there with no leverage and came out with an emergency board meeting. Ethan, I didn't say I had no leverage. I said there was no transaction. Another pause. He could almost hear his brother working through the distinction. Alexander, those are different things, Ethan, yes. He put the car in drive. He had 50 minutes before he needed to be at Lily's school. His phone buzzed again. Not Alexander this time, Patricia Lynn. He answered on the second ring. Patricia, Ethan. Her voice had the particular quality it got when she was managing 3 things simultaneously and was very good at it. I have something to tell you, and I need you to not be alarmed. He gripped the wheel slightly. That's a concerning opening. Victoria Sterling called me this morning. He exhaled. I know, I told her to. A brief silence. You told her to call me. Yes, after everything that happened last night. Patricia, I'm not questioning it. She took a breath. She wants to make a contribution, a significant one. She was very clear that she didn't want it used for publicity, didn't want her name attached publicly, didn't want it characterized as reputation management. She used the word privately about 4 times in our conversation. She wants to give quietly. A pause, Ethan. She wants to contribute $2 million to the Pediatric Surgery Fund. The car was very quiet. $2 million, Ethan said. She said she has a board meeting this afternoon, her own board, Sterling International, and she wanted to do this before it. She said it mattered to do it in the right order. Ethan thought about Victoria's voice that morning. I wanted to do something with that before it fades. Let her, he said. You're sure? She means it, Patricia. Let her mean it. A pause. Okay, another pause. You know what the $2 million combined with our current fund puts us exactly at? He did the math. Rachel's surgical ward expansion. The full 2-year operational budget, Patricia said. Down to approximately $40,000. The car moved through early afternoon Chicago traffic. Ordinary Tuesday, people on sidewalks with coffee cups. A delivery truck, a woman pushing a stroller, the unremarkable specific texture of a city going about its business. Ethan, Patricia said quietly, do you understand what last night? Yes, he said. The dominoes that one moment. One incident, one man deciding to stay. Her voice was careful. Not performative, just real. And now we have a board chair reconsidering his vote, and a major donor contributing anonymously, and a pediatric ward that 2 days ago was a budget line item is now real, Ethan said. Is now real, she repeated. They were both quiet for a moment. How are you doing? Patricia asked. Really asking. I'm going to pick up my daughter from school, he said. Good answer. She carried Jupiter by herself all day. I want to hear about it. Patricia made the same sound, Mrs. Patterson had made in the hallway, that involuntary, warm sound that certain truths produce in people who still know how to feel them. Go get her, Patricia said. He got her. Lily was standing out front of the school with her backpack and an expression of restrained triumph that she was only partially managing to restrain. Jupiter, the large styrofoam ball, painted in swirling orange and brown, which had survived its school debut, was tucked under her arm. She got in the car, buckled her seatbelt, settled Jupiter carefully on her lap. Dad, she said. Yeah, Mrs. Chen said my solar system was the most scientifically accurate model in the class. She did? She said most people make Jupiter too small. I made it the right size. You researched the ratios. Obviously. Lily looked at him with the patient expression of a 7-year-old, explaining something to an adult who should already know it. Scale matters. Ethan started the car. It does, he agreed. They drove for a minute. Then Lily said, Daddy, is the lady going to be in trouble? He didn't have to ask which lady. I don't know, he said honestly. Probably some, because of what she did, yes. Is that because of you? Ethan thought about this carefully. Not directly. What's happening to her is because of what she did. Not because of anything I did. Lily turned this over. But if she hadn't done it to you specifically, then it wouldn't have been recorded. No, he glanced at her. That's true. Do you feel bad about that? A little, he said honestly. Why? She was mean. She was. But feeling bad about something that happens to someone, even if they earned it, isn't the same as thinking it shouldn't have consequences. Both things can be true. Lily was quiet for a moment. Then, like how I felt bad when Tyler got in trouble for the thing with the markers, even though he was being really annoying. Exactly like that. Okay. She nodded, satisfied with the framework. That makes sense. They stopped at a red light. Daddy, Lily said. Yeah, Mrs. Chen also said you were on the news. He looked at the light. She showed us the video, Lily said. He turned to look at her, the class, she clarified. She said it was an important example of dignity under pressure. We talked about it for like 20 minutes. Ethan stared at his daughter. Your class watched the video, he said. Mrs. Chen framed it educationally. Lily appeared untroubled by this. Tommy Reardon said, you should have yelled at her. Mrs. Chen said that's why Tommy Reardon is still working on his emotional regulation. A pause. I didn't say you were my dad until after the discussion. Why not? Lily looked at him with the particular expression she'd gotten still, even at 7, even now from her mother. The expression that was entirely honest and entirely without apology. Because I wanted to hear what they said about you when they didn't know I was listening, she said. The light turned green. Ethan drove. And what did they say? He asked after a moment. Mostly good things, Lily said. Emma Lou cried a little. Mrs. Chen said it was okay. He said nothing. I think Emma Lou has a lot of feelings, Lily added. A lot of people do, Ethan said. Yeah, Lily looked out the window. I was proud of you. The car moved through the afternoon. Thanks, baby, Ethan said quietly. You're welcome. She adjusted Jupiter on her lap. Can we get tacos? Yeah, he said, we can get tacos. They got tacos. They came home. Lily did her homework at the kitchen table, while Ethan responded to emails carefully, selectively, declining the media requests and the speaking invitations and the offer from the Dignity in the Workplace Coalition, which he passed along to Patricia, with a note suggesting the foundation itself might be a better representative than he was. He accepted one request, a brief written statement, not for the press, but for the hospital's internal newsletter, at Rachel Kim's personal ask. 3 paragraphs about why the pediatric ward mattered. Nothing about himself, nothing about the gala, just the work. He sent it at 5:47. At 6:15 his phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize. Not a journalist prefix, a Chicago area code, but not one he'd seen in the wave of incoming contacts over the last 18 hours. He answered. Hello, a pause, then a woman's voice. Careful, slightly uncertain. The voice of someone who had rehearsed an opening and was now slightly past the moment where it felt right. Is this Ethan Whitmore? It is. Who's this? Another pause. My name is Sandra Okafor, the woman said. I'm a single mother. I have a daughter, she's 9. Her name is Imani. Her voice steadied slightly on the name, the way parents' voices do when they say their child's name in a context that matters. She needs a surgery. The waiting list at Northwestern is she stopped. I'm sorry. I know this is, I got your number from someone who works at the foundation. I know this is completely inappropriate. I know you don't. Sandra, Ethan said. She stopped. Take a breath, he said. A pause, the sound of a breath. Tell me about Imani, he said. The pause this time was different. The pause of someone who had been preparing for resistance and had received the opposite. She's 9, Sandra said. She loves drawing. She wants to be an architect. She draws buildings on everything, on her homework, on the edges of her school books. Her teacher keeps the drawings on the wall. Her voice had found its steadiness now. The particular steadiness that comes when you talk about someone you love to someone who is actually listening. She was diagnosed 14 months ago. She needs a surgery. That her voice caught. Just briefly, the waiting list. We've been on it for 7 months. Every month I call. Every month they say department, Ethan asked. Pediatric surgery, Northwestern Memorial. His hand tightened slightly on the phone. The attending, he said. Do you have a name, doctor? Kim, Sandra said.
Rachel Kim. I've met her twice.
She's wonderful. She said Imani is a priority but the capacity. Sandra, Ethan said. Yes? Can I call you back in 20 minutes? A silence. Yes, of course. I'm sorry if I... You did the right thing calling, Ethan said. Give me 20 minutes. He ended the call. He sat for exactly 3 seconds. Then he called Rachel Kim. She answered on the second ring. Ethan, I was just Imani Okafor, he said, 9 years old. Your patient. 7 months on the surgical waiting list. A pause, brief. The pause of a doctor cross-referencing a name and a file in real time. Yes, Rachel said carefully. What does she need? Another pause. Ethan. Patient information. What does she need to move up? Rachel was quiet for a moment. He could hear the particular quality of her silence, not evasive, not resistant, but moving through the ethical and logistical geometry of the question at the speed of someone who did this for a living. Capacity, she said finally. We're running at 94%. The OR schedule is,
if the ward expansion was approved tomorrow.
The construction timeline is Rachel, a beat. There's a temporary capacity measure, Rachel said, more quietly now. We could expand surgical scheduling into an adjacent space, short term. It's been proposed before and rejected on budget grounds. If we had the funding guaranteed, how much? For the temporary expansion, 3 months bridge funding, approximately $240,000. The kitchen was very quiet. Lily's pencil scratched against her homework at the table. Jupiter sat on the counter. The crayon heart was still on the refrigerator. Call your department administrator tonight, Ethan said. Tell them you have the bridge funding. I'll have Patricia confirm the transfer tomorrow morning. The silence on Rachel's end had a specific texture. Ethan,
If Carver's board vote goes through tomorrow, you'll have the permanent expansion.
this is just the bridge. You're doing this for one patient. I'm doing this for all of them, he said. But yes, also for her. Rachel Kim, who had spent 15 years in pediatric surgery and had learned necessarily, practically to maintain clinical distance from the weight of individual cases, because the alternative was not sustainable, made a sound that was not clinical. Not distant, just real. Okay, she said. Her voice was controlled, but controlled in the way of something held carefully, not suppressed. Okay, call your administrator, he said. I'll handle the rest. He ended the call. He called Patricia. He gave her the number and the purpose, and listened to her say, "Oh, Ethan," in the particular voice she used, when she was past the point of being surprised by him, and had simply decided to feel it fully instead. He hung up. He sat at the kitchen table. Across from him, Lily looked up from her homework. "You okay?" she said. "Yes, you have the face." "What face?" "The one where something happened, but it's a good thing, and you're trying to be normal about it." He looked at his daughter, 7 years old, dark eyes. A pencil in her hand and styrofoam Jupiter on the counter, and homework on the table, and the absolute complete specific certainty that she knew her father's face better than anyone on earth. "A little girl named Imani is going to get her surgery," he said. Lily looked at him. "Because of last night," she said. He thought about all of it, the champagne glass, the torn shirt, the 43,000 views that became 4 million. Carver watching the video at breakfast. Victoria calling Patricia before her board meeting. Rachel's voice saying okay in the particular way she'd said it. The chain of it. The impossible, unappable chain of one moment connecting to the next. Connecting to a 9-year-old girl who drew buildings on the edges of her homework and wanted to be an architect. "Yes," he said, "because of last night." Lily nodded slowly. Then she picked up her pencil and went back to her homework. "Good," she said simply. "That's what last night was for then." Ethan looked at his daughter for a long moment. "Yeah," he said softly. "That's what it was for." His phone buzzed on the table. A text from a number he now recognized, Victoria Sterling. It said, "Board meeting went better than expected. I told them the truth. All of it. I thought you should know." He picked up the phone. Type back, "Thank you for telling me." 3 seconds. Victoria, Patricia called. "I heard about the bridge funding." "About the little girl." A pause. "Then you did that today." After everything, he looked at the message for a moment. He typed, "You helped. Your contribution covered most of it." Another pause. Longer this time. "Victoria, I didn't know it would go there when I called Patricia this morning." Ethan, "It doesn't usually work that way. You just make the decision that's in front of you and see where it goes." A long silence on her end. Long enough that he thought the conversation was done. Then, "That's not how I've lived my life." He read that. He thought about what to say. He typed, "I know. But you're doing it now." He put the phone down. Lily was still writing. The kitchen was warm. The evening was settling in around them the way evenings did, gradually, ordinarily, without announcement. In about an hour he would make dinner. In about 3 hours Lily would be asleep. Tomorrow morning Carver's board would vote. Tomorrow afternoon Patricia would confirm the transfer. Somewhere across the city, Sandra Okafor was going to receive a phone call from Rachel Kim's office that she had been waiting 7 months for. And somewhere in a Sterling International boardroom, a woman who had torn a stranger's shirt 24 hours ago was sitting in the wreckage and the possibility of what came after, trying to figure out how to build something real in place of what she'd broken. Ethan didn't know how that story ended. He knew how his did. It ended the same way it began, in a kitchen, with his daughter. with the next right thing waiting quietly in front of him, unannounced and unspectacular, and entirely worth doing. He got up to start dinner. He didn't check his phone again until Lily was asleep. The board voted at 9:41 the following morning. Ethan knew because Rachel Kim texted him during it, not the vote itself. She couldn't do that. But immediately after, in the 40 seconds between the final count and the moment the room began to move. The text was 4 words, unanimous. It passed, unanimous. He read it, standing in his kitchen, still in the clothes he'd put on to take Lily to school. Coffee going cold on the counter the way it always did when something pulled his attention completely away from the ordinary mechanics of a morning. He read it twice. Then he put the phone face down on the counter, pressed both palms flat against the cool surface, and just breathed for a moment. Not dramatically, not with the particular performance of a man having a meaningful moment. Just breathing the way you breathe when something you've quietly wanted for a long time finally becomes real and your body needs a second to catch up to the fact. Unanimous. Carver hadn't just flipped his own vote. He'd brought the room. Ethan picked up his phone and texted Rachel back, "Tell your team." Her response was immediate, already did. 3 people are crying. I'm pretending I'm not. He smiled at that. Then he texted Patricia, board approved the expansion. Unanimous, Patricia, I know. Carver called me directly. Ethan. He could feel the sentence that wanted to follow that. He typed before she could finish it, call Sandra Okafor. That comes first, a pause, Patricia already dialing. He put the phone in his pocket, picked up his cold coffee, looked at the crayon heart on the refrigerator. The morning continued. It continued the way mornings did when the world had shifted, and nobody had quite caught up to the shift yet, with the dishes needing to be done, and the recycling needing to go out, and the unremarkable, patient requirements of a life that kept moving, regardless of what had happened in the 48 hours preceding it. He did the dishes. He took out the recycling. He answered 6 emails, declined 2 more media requests, and responded to a message from the Dignity in the Workplace Coalition, with a phone number for Patricia Lynn, and a brief note explaining that she was the right person to speak to, and that, if they wanted to do something meaningful, funding healthcare for underserved children was more useful than a panel in Washington. He got a response within 20 minutes expressing enthusiastic interest in partnering with the foundation. He forwarded it to Patricia without comment. At 11:30, Alexander called. Unanimous, Alexander said before Ethan could open the conversation. I heard. Carver apparently gave a speech before the vote. Rachel's administrator told our mutual friend in the development office, who told me. Alexander's voice had that particular quality it got when he was proud of something and was choosing not to be transparent about it. He talked about why he went into hospital administration. His son. He apparently mentioned you, he mentioned me. He said, and I'm paraphrasing because I got this third hand, that watching one person choose dignity over reaction reminded him that the institutions we build are only as good as the values we bring into the room. A pause. Third-hand paraphrase, but still. Ethan said nothing for a moment. You're quiet, Alexander said. I'm thinking. About what? About the fact that none of this was the plan, Ethan said. Last Tuesday I was going to carry champagne glasses, do something useful for a few hours, and go home to Lily. That was the plan, and now there's a pediatric ward being expanded, and a board chair giving speeches, and 4.1 million views, Alexander said. Please stop telling me the count. It's 5.7 now. Alex, I'm just keeping you informed. Stop keeping me informed. Alexander made the particular sound he made when he was doing something anyway. The point is, he said, none of it was the plan, but all of it was you. The plan changed because of who you are. That's not coincidence, Ethan. That's causality. Ethan sat down at the kitchen table. She chose you, he said. What? Victoria, in that ballroom. She looked at 100 people that night, and she chose me to do what she did. And I've been thinking about why. Alexander was quiet. I think, Ethan said slowly, that people like Victoria don't pick people who look like they'll fight back. They pick people who look like they'll absorb it. They pick the person who seems like the path of least resistance. He paused. And the reason all of this happened, the reason the chain of it goes the way it does, is because I didn't absorb it. Not because I fought, but because I didn't disappear. You stayed visible, Alexander said. I stayed myself, Ethan corrected. Which was visible enough, a long silence. You know what Dad would say, Alexander said. Don't, Ethan said, but he was smiling. He'd say you always were the stubborn one. He'd be right. He usually was. They stayed on the line for a moment in the particular comfortable silence of brothers who have been doing this long enough that silence is its own form of conversation. What happens now? Alexander asked. The same question he'd asked 2 nights ago in the ballroom. Ethan thought about it. Now Imani Okafor gets her surgery, he said. Now Rachel builds her ward. Now Patricia runs her foundation and does the real work, and I figure out how to stay out of the way usefully. He paused. And now Victoria Sterling figures out who she wants to be on the other side of this. That's hers to do, and you? I have a 7-year-old who wants to show me something she made in art class, and I promised I'd look at it tonight. Alexander laughed. Real laugh, the good kind. Of course you did. It's a self-portrait, apparently. She says it looks exactly like her. Does it? According to Mrs. Patterson, it looks like a potato with hair. But Lily is very confident about it. She gets that from her mother, Alexander said. The confidence or the portraits? Both, Ethan smiled. Yeah, he said, both. He picked up Lily at 3:15. She had the self-portrait. It was. And Ethan examined it with the complete undivided seriousness that all of Lily's artwork received, regardless of what else was happening in the world, unmistakably a person. The proportions were creative. The hair was rendered in approximately 40 purple lines that radiated outward from the head in a way that was less realistic and more expressive, which he decided was a choice. The eyes were large and dark, and somehow, despite the medium and the scale and the potato situation, managed to capture something true. What do you think? Lily asked. I think it looks like you, he said. She beamed. I knew it, the eyes especially. She looked at the portrait. I tried to make them look how I feel when I'm thinking really hard about something. He looked at the eyes again, at the particular focused intensity Lily had rendered in crayon. You got it, he said. She folded it carefully and put it in her backpack for safekeeping. They drove home. She talked about school, about Emma Lou, who had indeed cried again, this time during a read-aloud about a dog, and about Tommy Reardon's ongoing emotional regulation journey, and about a new unit in science that apparently involved growing something in a cup, and she had already named her cup's future plant Gerald. Ethan listened to all of it. He listened the way he always listened to Lily completely, with the specific quality of attention that he'd given everything he'd decided mattered, which was exactly what she was, the thing that mattered most. At 4:30, a notification appeared on his phone from a news source he'd been avoiding. He saw the headline before he could stop himself. It read, Victoria Sterling steps back from day-to-day operations, announces comprehensive workplace culture review at Sterling International. He read it once. Then he set the phone down and helped Lily decide where to hang the self-portrait. They settled on the refrigerator, next to the crayon heart. 2 pieces of artwork taped with overlapping Scotch tape, side by side on a refrigerator door in a house with a slightly uneven front step. In a city that was still talking about a Tuesday night at a charity gala and a man who had refused to disappear. He made dinner at 7:15 while Lily was in the bath, arguing philosophically with herself about whether Gerald would prefer sunlight or shade, a debate she was conducting both sides of. With impressive rigor, Ethan's phone rang. He almost didn't answer. He didn't recognize the number. He'd been not answering numbers he didn't recognize for 2 days. But something instinct, or the particular restlessness that comes when a story hasn't quite finished finding its shape, made him pick up. Hello, a breath then, Mr. Whitmore. This is Sandra Okafor. He sat down. Sandra, he said, I'm sorry to call again. Dr. Kim called me this morning, she told me. Her voice had the quality of someone who has been crying recently and has not entirely finished. She told me about the surgery, about the scheduling. She said. Sandra stopped, steadied herself. She said there was private funding that made it possible. She didn't tell me who, but I called the foundation. I asked Patricia. She said she couldn't tell me directly, but that I could call you. Ethan said nothing. I just wanted to say thank you, Sandra said. That's all. I don't have anything to give you. I don't have connections, or I'm a school librarian, Mr. Whitmore. I have Amani, and I have my job, and I have 7 months of phone calls to that waiting list. And her voice broke cleanly. Voices break when the thing you've been holding finally has somewhere to go. She's going to be okay. They're saying she's going to be okay. The kitchen was very still. Sandra, Ethan said, yes. What does Amani want to build? A pause. The pause of someone who wasn't expecting that question and whose whole face changed around it. Bridges, Sandra said, and her voice on that word was entirely different from any of the other words she'd said. She wants to build bridges. She says she likes things that connect places that couldn't reach each other before. Something shifted behind Ethan's sternum. Tell her, he said carefully, that she's going to have a lot of time to figure out how. A silence. The long, specific silence of a mother trying to hold herself together on a phone call. Thank you, Sandra said. Just thank you. You're welcome, he said. He sat at the kitchen table after the call ended, phone in his hand, and he thought about bridges. About things that connected places that couldn't reach each other. About a 9-year-old girl who drew buildings on the margins of her homework and had, without knowing it, without ever meeting him, given the most accurate description of what the last 48 hours had actually been. One moment, one decision to stay visible, one chain of consequence, reaching from a ballroom to a boardroom, to a kitchen to a hospital ward, to a little girl who wanted to build bridges. He thought about his wife. He thought about her, the way he thought about her, in moments like this, not with the raw, hollowing grief of the early years, but with the gentler, more complex thing that grief became when you'd had time to let it settle into something livable. He thought about what she would say. She had always been better than him at naming things, at finding the exact word for the thing he was circling. She would say, "You see, Ethan, you see why you stayed." And she would be right. She was usually right. Lily came out of the bath in her Yellow Star pajamas, hair damp, a towel around her shoulders like a cape, her face carrying the pleased, clean look of a child who has had a satisfactory bath and is ready to wind down. She climbed onto the couch next to him, settled in. Put her head against his arm. "Tell me a story," she said. He looked at her. What kind? A true one. He thought about what had happened in the last 2 days. About the champagne and the torn shirt and the borrowed jacket and the 48 hours that had followed. About Carver's vote and Patricia's phone calls and Sandra Okafor's voice saying bridges. About Victoria Sterling stepping back to rebuild something honest. About a board chair remembering his son. About Rachel Kim crying in a way she was pretending she wasn't. About a 7-year-old girl who told her father's story to her class and waited to hear what they said when they didn't know she was listening. There was a man, Ethan started. Lily looked up at him. Who decided that the most important thing he could do was be useful, he continued. Not famous, not important, just useful. So he showed up to places where he could help, and he did the work, and he didn't tell anyone his name. Why not? Because his name didn't matter, the work mattered. Lily considered this, but then people found out. They did, Ethan said, because of something that happened. Something hard, the shirt thing. He looked at her. You know this story. I want to hear your version. He was quiet for a moment. After the shirt thing, he said, something unexpected happened. The hard thing, the thing that was supposed to make him feel small, turned into something else. Because he didn't disappear, and because he didn't disappear, other people didn't have to either. A doctor got the ward she'd been fighting for. A little girl got her surgery. And the woman who did the hard thing, he paused. She had to look at herself. Which was maybe the hardest thing of all. Lily was quiet. Is the man okay? She asked. He's okay, Ethan said. Is he sad sometimes still? Yes. About Mom?
Yeah.
She nodded. She understood that equation. She lived inside it too, in her own 7-year-old way, in the space where the sadness and the okayness coexisted. Which was not a contradiction, but simply the truth of what life was after loss. But he has good things, she said. He has the best things, Ethan said. She leaned back against his arm. I know who the man is, she said. I know you do. He's you, he's me. She was quiet for a moment. Then, with the particular clarity she produced, when she'd been thinking about something carefully, and was ready to deliver the conclusion. Daddy. I think the reason everything happened, the way it did the ward, and Amani, and all of it is, because you didn't pretend the hard thing didn't happen. You let it be hard and you stayed anyway. He looked at his daughter. "Where did you get that?" he said. "Mrs. Chen," she said. She talks about authentic emotional processing in second grade. Mrs. Chen is very advanced. He pulled her closer. She let him. The house was quiet around them. The evening had fully arrived. The crayon heart and the self-portrait were side by side on the refrigerator. Gerald, the future plant, was waiting to be born. The world outside was still talking, the news cycle churning, the view count climbing, the stories being written by people who hadn't been in the room, but in here it was just the two of them, and that was not a small thing. That was not a lesser thing. That was in the accounting system that Ethan Whitmore had built his entire second life around, the largest thing there was. 3 weeks later, Ethan received a letter, not an email. A physical letter, handwritten, on plain paper, in the careful handwriting of someone who had thought about every word before putting it down. It was from Victoria Sterling, not the PR version. Not the statement, just a letter. She wrote that the board had completed its review. That she had spent 3 weeks in meetings that were the most uncomfortable of her professional life, which was, she said, exactly what they needed to be. That Sterling International was implementing changes, real ones, structural ones, not the performative kind. New protocols, new accountability systems, a new internal advocate position that reported directly to the board, not to her. She had funded it personally. She wrote that she had visited the Children's Healthcare Alliance, had met Patricia, had toured the ward, the existing ward, not yet the expansion, that was still underway, and had stood in a room where 3 children were recovering from surgeries. She wrote that one of them was drawing. She didn't say what. She wrote that she didn't know if she was a changed person. That she thought changed person was probably too clean a phrase for what was actually a long, uncomfortable, ongoing process of choosing differently one day at a time. But she was in it. She was choosing to be in it. She wrote, "You told me I had started to remember. I think you were right. I think I had stopped believing that the way I treated people was a reflection of who I was, rather than just a strategy. I had convinced myself they were separate. They are not separate. I know that now." And at the bottom of the letter she wrote one more thing. She wrote, "Your daughter sent me a drawing. I don't know how she got my address. I suspect your brother. It is a self-portrait, I believe, though it is, I say this with complete respect, somewhat abstract." She wrote on the back, "My dad says kindness shows who we really are. This is who I really am. I have it on my desk. I look at it every morning before my first meeting of the day." Ethan read the letter at the kitchen table. He read it twice. Then he looked at the empty space on the refrigerator, where the self-portrait had been until 3 weeks ago, and he understood now where it had gone. And he thought about his daughter, 7 years old, yellow star pajamas, purple crayon hair radiating outward in every direction, deciding quietly, on her own, to send a piece of herself to someone who needed reminding of something real. He thought about what Patricia had said. The story is already being written. He thought she was wrong, actually, not about the writing, about the already, because the story was still being written. It would keep being written in every small decision that followed from this one in Carver's voice. On a board call 3 months from now, in Rachel's department as the new ward came online. In Sandra Okafor's voice when she described Imani's recovery. In Victoria Sterling looking at a potato-shaped self-portrait before her first meeting of the day, and being reminded that the person across from her was a person. In Lily growing up, knowing that her father had been in a room where something hard happened, and had chosen, in that exact moment, to be exactly who he was. In all of it, continuing, quietly, the way the most important things always continued. Ethan folded the letter. He held it in his hands for a moment. Then he got up, went to the refrigerator, moved the crayon heart 2 inches to the left. He taped the letter next to it, 3 overlapping pieces of Scotch tape, the way Lily had shown him, because she was right, when you wanted something to stay, you didn't use one. He stepped back and looked at it. The crayon heart that said, "Daddy saves kids," slightly faded now from 3 weeks of kitchen steam and morning light. And beside it, a handwritten letter from a woman who had started the process of becoming someone she could live with. Both real, both part of the same thing. Both there because one man, on one Tuesday night in Chicago, had carried a tray of champagne glasses into a ballroom where nobody knew his name, and had decided, When the hard thing happened, that the right response was not to be small, not to disappear, not to let someone else's fear determine the shape of his dignity. He had simply stayed, and staying, it turned out, was its own kind of power. The kind that didn't announce itself, the kind that didn't require an audience or a crisis or a viral video or a borrowed jacket or a podium. The kind that just kept choosing, one morning at a time, to be worth the space it took up in the world. Ethan Whitmore stood in his kitchen and looked at the refrigerator. Then he heard the particular rapid-fire footsteps of a 7-year-old who had remembered something important and was coming to tell him about it, and he turned away from the wall, and he opened his arms, and she ran into them, and that was enough. That had always been enough. That would always be enough.